So, these are just, I showed you the first schematic, which was a very high level schematic. Now, this is a little better schematic. So, first you look at this 2D, both are 2D actually. So, you look at this figure first, and I think now things will be more clear to you. See, here you are putting hydrogen helium mixture in. So, what is this? This is fuel. So, through some fuel it is coming here in this burner, and here you are putting the sample. So, now this is sample bypass, some sample with a prefixed flow rate, it goes through this coil and it mixes with the fuel. Okay. So, now this sample and fuel mixture goes in, and then here you are putting the air in. So, now this air is going up. So, fuel goes in from this side, air comes from outside, and then here you have mixture of fuel and air, and then you have some kind of a igniter. So, this hydrogen air mixture will rise and this igniter will apply a spark. So, there will be a flame. So, now you will have a steady flame, you have to of course adjust some flow rates, etc. So, there will be a steady flame of hydrogen helium air mixture, and then it is also getting the supply of of the sample containing hydrocarbons at a prefixed flow rate. So, this will generate some ions, and those ions are collected between this collector lead and this burner lead, and obviously this is cathode, this is anode. So, there will be a DC current that will be generated, because all the electrons will get collected here and all the protons or positive ions will collect here, and you will have a DC output, and then of course, you have to do the signal processing. This is a slightly better picture, again showing the same thing actually. So, the fuel comes in, fuel in this case is hydrogen helium mixture, sample comes in, and this is the burner. Okay. Air is coming from outside. So, here you see you have flames, and here they have shown two different electrodes where ionization takes place, because you have applied high voltage and there will be some current produced, and that current is actually measured through some amplifier and etc., etc. This is the igniter discharge point, which is basically used to start this flame, okay, because this will rise and this tube will be filled with hydrogen air mixture, and then you apply the spark. So, the flames will come here and this will sit here nicely depending on what is the flow rate. Okay. And this is the thermistor sensor. This will just basically detect that flames are on. If the flames are not on, so if the flames are on, this will be hot and it will have some resistance, okay, or there will be change in resistance when the flames are off, and that will detect whether the flames are on or off. Okay. So, so this is basically standalone slow response FID. So, slow response FID means what? Slow response FID means you have, normally we use slow speed FIDs only in our measurements. Actually FID is a very fast process. Okay. So, FID is quite fast, but what is slow is sample handling system. Why it is slow? Because you have taken a sample from somewhere engine, then it has to travel 6 meters, there is heated coil, it will take time for that sample to travel 6 meters. So, if you change the load and composition changes, it will come to the detector after say few seconds. So, the detector will respond, although it is very fast, it will detect very quickly, but since the sample handling is slow, flow rates are rather slow, it will look like it is very slow. So, that is why it is called slow response FID. So, again here same thing, I have shown you everything. So, normally in most of the engine measurements we use slow response FID, because most of the measurements are taken at steady state conditions. That means, when the engine is running at fixed speed, fixed load, you allow it to thermally stabilize after few seconds. But suppose you are interested in making fast measurements, okay, you want to do the measurements in transient, you change the load and immediately how the hydrocarbons are changing within milliseconds, how do you detect it? So, that complicates your life quite a bit. But anyway, now people have come up, there is a company called Combustion, and they have come up with this fast response FID. So, what they do is they bring this whole assembly very close to the sample point. So, rather than bringing the sample all the way to the analyzer, what they do is they bring this small assembly, it is a small assembly, they bring it very close to the sampling point, In fact, they can mount it right outside the exhaust valve of the engine. So, they just take a very small sample from there and right there they will mount this assembly. So, now here the sample capillary will bring the sample, you have fuel gas air coming in, and then you have the flames here, high voltage detector, and from there electrical signals travel very fast. So, they will take a long cable and then take it to the processing unit. So, basically the difference between these two is that in one we are taking the sample quite a long distance, in the other one we are doing the sampling right at the time of at the point of measurement, and we are taking the signal long distance. Okay. And so, this is one very recent development, it is developed in last 5 to 10 years time, and very few I do not think anybody has this equipment in India, if I am, but I may be wrong. This equipment lot of people have. Okay. So, FID is the automotive emission industry standard method for measuring hydrocarbons. So, normally you see, you must have seen that people use these, you must have gone to these PUC measurement things, PUC measurement, you know, for the vehicles. Inside a Maruti van there is a PUC and there is a small analyzer. So, that analyzer basically is an NDIR emission analyzer for CO, CO2 and also for HC, but NDIR is absolutely bad method for measuring hydrocarbons, but it is a cheap analyzer, it costs only like 3 lakh rupees. Okay. So, for PUC it is okay, but when it comes to research, NDIR is just, nobody should try that. FID is a industry standard, it is acceptable, it is accurate, and it is what should be used for any research study. Okay. So, the sample gas is introduced in hydrogen flame inside a FID. Any hydrocarbon will produce in the sample will produce ions when they are burnt. Ions are detected by metal detectors which are biased using a very high voltage. The current across the collector is proportional to the rate of ionization, which in turn depends on the concentration of the hydrocarbon in the sample gas. The ionization is very rapid. So, slow time response of the conventional FID is mainly due to sample handling. A typical slow analyzer might respond in 1 to 2 seconds, depending on what is the length of the pipe, it could even be faster or it could be even longer. The combustion high HFR fast response FID analyzer use conventional detection principle. So, principle of this and this is same, but with a unique patented sampling system. So, this is patented by combustion and no other company makes this. So, this gives a millisecond response time, as soon as it is produced within like next 1 or 2 cycles you may be able to detect. Okay. So, this is very fast and very good development. This is just a 3D schematic, just to give you an idea. Here the fuel is entering, here the sample is entering, here the exhaust is entering, this is your burner. Okay. This is the burner jet coming out, this is the burner contact, this is the collector of the ions. Okay. And here you have all these igniters, thermistors, and this is the exhaust that is going out. So, this is not a very big unit, but these can be a part of the big analyzer. These can also be standalone units and they are very quick. Now, let us look at the advantage and disadvantage of FID measurement compared to other measurements. So, one of the first advantage is that FIDs are relatively inexpensive to acquire and operate, not very expensive, about 25 lakhs or so. Low maintenance cost, hardly anything is required. Apart from cleaning and replacing of the FID jet, these detectors are practically maintenance free. Okay. So, once you purchase it, it is going to work for you without much trouble for 5-6 years easily. Fairly rugged. Okay. So, relatively resistant to misuse. So, even if you give to your graduate students, there is it is highly unlikely that they will spoil it. Okay. Linearity is very good, detection range is quite good. So, FID can measure organic concentrations, so very low and very high levels, and it has a linear response of the order of 10 to the power 6, 1 to 10 to the power 6. But there are some disadvantages, and first is that it cannot detect inorganic substances, only organic. In some systems, CO and CO2 can be detected in the FID using the methanizer, which is the bed of nickel catalyst that reduces the CO and CO2 to methane, which in turn can be detected by FID. So, if you are having a methanizer, so then what will happen, CO and CO2 in presence of nickel will get converted to methane, and then obviously your FID is going to detect it, although it is not hydrocarbon, it is originating from, in the exhaust you have carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide. Okay, so these are some of the negative aspects. Now the question is, one is that, you know, total hydrocarbons. So this is what we are talking about so far is THC measurement, okay, total hydrocarbon. Nowadays, you know, in some of the emission regulations, the total hydrocarbon emissions are split into methane hydrocarbons and non-methane hydrocarbons. So what it really means is that if there is methane C1 is present, you treat it separately, and rest of the things is called NMHC, non-methane hydrocarbon. So now once you want to do that, you know, problem becomes a little complicated, okay, using the FID. So but you can still use some methods smartly to do it. So you can measure the methane using gas chromatography. Gas chromatography is a fairly straightforward method, okay. So I will not discuss this in detail, I will discuss briefly, and then there is another method, it is called non-methane cutter method. So in GC method, basically what you are doing is, in GC, you know, there is a column, big column. Column is nothing but a capillary which is which could be 30 meter, 50 meter, and there is some kind of adsorbent fill in it. So when you put some kind of a mixture, every species will have a different mobility inside the media that is filled in the column. So so the species will get separated out. C1 will say come first, and then there may be C2, then there may be C3. So in a long column, these species will separate out from each other, and if you know at what distance it is coming, you can actually separate them out, okay. So what is done is, in GC method for measuring the methane, first you use molecular sieve pora pack column. So this is a different column. Column, as I said, it is a capillary, so it looks like a thick wire, and it could be any length, 30 meter, 50 meter, 100 meter, depending on what you want to separate. And what you actually do is you make a coil. So when the hydrocarbon flows, it flows through that coil. It is long, but it is basically made small by winding it up. So this is the column that you are actually going to use, methanol molecular sieve pora pack column, and what this does is it separates the exhaust species in the exhaust sample, and what this does is it basically creates separates the hydrocarbon into methane air and carbon monoxide, and then remaining non-methane hydrocarbons, carbon dioxide and water. So these two are separated out, okay. And then what you do is you take this, and then molecular sieve separates the methane from carbon monoxide and air. So molecular sieves have a particular size between their atomic structures, and only methane can pass, and air and carbon monoxide remain. So basically only the methane passes, and then, you know, once you have separated this methane, you can just put it through FID, and that will give you methane hydrocarbon. So it's a fairly straightforward method. This is called gas chromatographic method, okay. The second method is called non-methane cutter method, okay. So non-methane cutter method, what happens is that non-methane cutter, that means you are cutting all other hydrocarbons other than methane. So all other hydrocarbons except methane are oxidized to carbon monoxide and water using a particular catalyst. So this catalyst is effective on all hydrocarbons except methane. So everything else get converted into carbon monoxide except methane, everything else is converted into carbon dioxide, okay. So now what you will have is, once you pass all your hydrocarbon sample through non-methane cutter, only methane will be left in the sample, and then, you know, you can pass this through the hot FID. Gas sample is passed through non-methane cutter first, where oxidation, all the non-methane hydrocarbons are converted to carbon dioxide. only methane is left, and then this methane is detected by hot FID. Okay. And total hydrocarbon minus methane hydrocarbon is equal to non-methane hydrocarbon. That is simple subtraction method. Okay. Any questions on FID? Yes.
In the GC method,
Yeah.
you have said that we have to separate the methane first and then send it to the FID. But FID only detects hydrocarbons, so why we need to separate the air and carbon monoxide from it?
Because this can affect your reading. Okay. You need not separate them as well. I mean, this is just to make the reading more precise. If you do not want this, there is hardly any need. Good point. So, as I said, the second species that we are interested in measuring is called oxides of nitrogen, NOx. So, first of all, you know, what is NOx? So, NOx basically mainly contains NO and NO2 in case of IC engines. There may be very small traces of N2O3, N2O5 also, but these will be in negligible fraction. Only NO and NO2 is what is present in the exhaust, in the engine exhaust. Okay. So, that is why rather than measuring NO, NO2, N2O3, N2O5 separately, which is also very difficult, what you do is you just forget about N2O3 and N2O5. That is the first thing that you do, because their concentrations may be 0.01% or of that order. So, you just ignore them. Only thing that are left to you is NO and NO2. Okay. So, this NOx measurement, and so therefore, it is called NOx, NOx, because you are not sure what will be that X when you average out everything. Okay. So, therefore, this is called oxides of nitrogen, and that is what you are interested in finding out, because it is very nasty substance as far as the environmental pollution is concerned, right. NO will get converted into NO2 eventually in the environment, right, and NO2 will react with the moisture, and once it reacts with the moisture, it will form HNO3, and HNO3 is acid. So, when the precipitation takes place, HNO3 will come down, and then it is, of course, it is dilute. So, it will cause lot of problems. It will harm the crops, it will harm the buildings, you know, all the roofs, there is iron in there. So, it will corrode all the iron. So, life of the buildings will go down, it will spoil all the paints. Okay. It will of course affect the people who are exposed to dilute nitric acid. Who would like to take a bath in nitric acid, whatever dilution it may have? The thought itself is very repelling, right. But that is what we have normally when we go to Delhi, and you know, particularly after Diwali, you have lot of NOx and SOx in the atmosphere. So, if the rain comes, you will practically be taking a bath in weak acid, nitric acid and sulfuric acid. So, it is very important that we measure this and we control this. So, for measurement, the method that is used is called chemiluminescence method. Now, I think we have discussed some of this while we were discussing the optical techniques. Chemiluminescence. Luminescence means what? Luminescence means light, right. Chemi means using some chemical reaction. So, generation of light using chemical reaction, that is what chemiluminescence means. And I think when we were discussing the optical methods, we also discussed this very in very detail, that suppose you know there is electron in some molecule, there is electron, you provided some kind of energy. Once you provided some kind of energy, what will happen? This will go to higher orbit, right, and once it will remain in the higher orbit for some time, and then spontaneously it will come back to the lower orbit, because the tendency of the universe is to remain in most stable condition, lowest energy format, right. And so, once it comes to the lower energy format, there will be emission of light photon, and the wavelength and the frequency of this light photon will depend on the difference in the energy level of these two states, right. Now, when it comes to chemiluminescence, this is luminescence. Chemiluminescence means that this energy to jump it to the higher orbit is provided by a chemical reaction. So, this excitation of the molecule is done by chemical reaction, and then it comes back and emits a photon. That is what is chemiluminescence. Okay. So, this is the basic principle. So, chemiluminescence is production of light from a chemical reaction. Two chemicals react to form an excited higher energy intermediate. So, this is just an intermediate whose life may be very short or very long, depends, it is spontaneous. But finally, it breaks down, releasing some of its energy as photons of light to reach the ground state. Okay. So, I will just show you a chemiluminescence analyzer, then we will discuss the physics of it. But just to show you chemiluminescence analyzer, here you have air or oxygen connected. Okay. So, this is restrictor, so some flow rate you will maintain, and it will come to ozone generator. So, ozone generator, what it will do is it will convert oxygen or oxygen in the air to ozone. That is the ozone generator, that is what it does. And then this ozone is supplied to this reaction chamber. Okay. Here you have the exhaust sample coming in. Now, you see the interesting part here is that chemiluminescence is created by NO only. So, NO actually reacts with ozone, and when that reaction happens, you generate one molecule of NO2 in excited state plus oxygen. If you already have NO2, you cannot excite it, right. So, basically what you need to do is you need to first convert all the NO2 into NO. So, there is a bypass, I will tell you what this bypass does. Okay. For the time being, you forget about this bypass. There is a sample back pressure valve, you forget about this also, just understand the principle. So, suppose all my sample is coming in, this sample contains NO as well as NO2, NO remains NO here and NO2 gets converted to NO by some chemical reaction using some catalyst. Okay. So, now I have reduced the NO2 to NO. So, what comes out of this converter is just the NO, part of which was already in NO form and most of it has been converted from NO2. And then it passes through the sample pressure valve, sample capillary, these are all some flow rate control, pressure control, etc. And then this NO goes into this reaction chamber, okay, where they are allowed to mix. So, now NO reacts with the ozone, and then it will generate NO2 in excited state, and that excited state will finally become NO2 normal plus photon, and that photon there will be some reactor window and that photon will fall on this photomultiplier tube. Photomultiplier tube is a device which basically converts the light signal to voltage signal, it is a transducer, right. So, this will generate some voltage and that voltage obviously will go to some electronics processing unit and it will give you some ppm of NOx. Okay. Now, you see what will happen. Suppose you are interested in finding out how much is NO and how much is NO2. So, I will come back here. So, if I am closing this bypass, all my NOx is getting converted to NO. So, here I will detect total NOx, right. Now, what I do is that I open this bypass and I close this ozonator. So, what will happen? All my NOx will go into this, but this NOx has NO2 plus some NO. So, only some NO will be detected here, because only that NO will react with the ozone. So, whatever NOx I detect when the bypass is on and NO to NO2 converter has been taken off the line, it will give you concentration of NO, because that is what it is detecting. Are you following me? So, what you do is you do two samples. One is when the converter is in the line, you have closed the bypass, then that gives the total NOx, and when the bypass is on and NOx converter is taken out of the circuit, then it gives NO. So, NO2 will be total NOx minus NO. So, now the NOx can be converted back into NO plus NO2. How much is NO? How much is NO2? Okay. Now, let us look at the chemistry. Okay. So, let us look at this principle of working. So, when NO and ozone react, a small fraction, roughly about 10% of the excited NO2 molecules is produced, and these are the reactions. NO plus ozone is equal to NO2 star. NO2 star means excited state plus oxygen, and this is 10%, 90% still only remains NO2 ground state. Okay. So, only 10%, and then this excited state becomes NO2 plus H nu. So, this H nu is what you detect, and then of course, you have to multiply it by 10 in order to get the actual number of photons. Okay. So, as the excited number of NO2 molecules decay to the ground state, light in the wavelength region of 0.6 to 3 micron is emitted. The quantity of excited NO2 produced is fixed at a given reaction temperature, and the intensity light produced during decay of the excited NO2 is proportional to concentration of NO in the sample. Okay. And therefore, you convert all the NO2 also into NO. So, now what happens is that you put the sample, and here you have the ozone. Now, the sample may contain lot of other species also. There may be carbon monoxide, there may be water vapors and other things. So, what happens is that it is quite possible that the excited NO2 molecule is attacked by a water molecule. There may be molecular collision, right. So, when that molecular collision happens, it is possible that the excited molecule may come down to ground state without emission of photon. It is possible. So, when that happens, that means you have lost the data, okay, and it gives lot of error in this measurement. So, in order to avoid this, what you do is you create some kind of vacuum here in this chamber. So, you create vacuum. So, once the vacuum is created, that means now you have reduced the number of molecules that are present in this chamber, and once you reduce the number of molecules, the possibility of collision also reduces. That is why chemiluminescence NOx analyzer is always operated in vacuum, and then this is the photon counter, photomultiplier tube essentially. Okay. So, a chemiluminescence detector is the industry standard method for measuring the oxides of nitrogen concentration. Reaction between NO and ozone emits light. The reaction is the basis for chemiluminescence detector, in which photons produced are detected by photomultiplier tube. The chemiluminescence detector output voltage is proportional to the concentration of NOx, NO concentration. The light producing reaction is very rapid, so careful sample handling is important in a very rapid response instrument. It uses a unique sampling system coupled with miniaturized chemiluminescence detector technology to give millisecond response time. So, it is a very fast detector. Okay. It has two remote sampling heads controlled by the MCU, which is called main control unit, and is capable of simultaneous sampling in two locations. The sample containing NO flows to a reactor where it reacts with the ozone to produce oxygen in the ozonator. In the reactor, NO is converted to NO2. A photomultiplier tube detects the light emitted by the excited NO2. Signal is then amplified and fed to the recorder or indicating equipment. The measurement of NOx NO2 in the sample is first converted to NO by heating in NO2 to NO converter prior to its introduction in the reactor. So, you heat it in the presence of a catalyst. Okay. At 315 degree centigrade, about 90% of the NO2 is converted to NO. This should be NO. The total concentration of NOx in the sample is thus measured as NO. When the sample is introduced in the reactor bypassing the NO2 to NO2 converter, concentration of NO alone is detected. I have explained this to you how it works. The difference between the two measurements provide the concentration of NO2 in the sample. The response of the instrument is linear with the NO concentration. This technique is very sensitive, and you see its sensitivity. It can detect up to 10 to the power minus 3 ppm of NOx. So, it is very, very sensitive. The output signal is proportional to the product of the sample flow rate and NO concentration. As the method is the flow sensitive, and accurate flow control is also required. So, if you are putting sample at a fast rate, obviously your detection will be more, but it does not mean that the sample has more NOx. So, it is the sample flow rate also needs to be controlled very, very precisely if you want to make a correct measurement. Calibration and operation are done with the same flow rate and same reactor temperature. Okay. Any question on the chemiluminescence detection method? Clear? All right. So, next let us study the smoke opacimeter. This is called opacity meter, or it is also called opacimeter, because if you write it as opacimeter, it becomes one word, opacimeter, smoke opacimeter. So, when it comes to smoke, smoke normally is characteristically coming out of diesel engines only. Particulates are normally coming out from diesel engines, okay, not from gasoline engines. But now particulates are also coming out of gasoline engines, where GDI engines. But GDI is a recent development. So, normally when you say particulate, the thing that comes into your mind is diesel engines. Okay. These instruments have been designed to quantify the visible smoke emission, utilizing such physical phenomena as the extinction of light beam by scattering or absorption. So, basically what you are doing is you are looking at the smoke. Two methods are used, and what are these two methods? One is that you have a tube filled by smoke. On one end you have a light source, on the other end you have a photo cell. Okay. Once you put the light on, the light will travel through this pipe. Some of the light will be blocked by the particles in the exhaust. So, now on this photo cell, lesser light will come and it will give some lower voltage signal. When there is clean exhaust, that means there is no particle, all the light will fall on this and voltage signal will be higher. So, it is actually inverse signal. Lower signal means higher smoke opacity, higher voltage means lower. So, it is an inverse scale actually. That is one method to do it. Second method is, so this is by light absorption, and then second method is scattering. So, what you do in scattering method, there are many instruments which are using this method, but I will just tell you a very basic principle. You take a filter paper and allow a fixed volume of exhaust gas to pass through it. So, when the exhaust gas passes through it, it could be a filter paper, it could be a ribbon, there are many instruments. So, fundamental is same. So, when the exhaust passes through it, clean gas will go out, leaving the particles. When it leaves the particle, that spot will become gray or black depending on how much soot is loaded in the exhaust. And then you can detect the blackness of that particle. How you can detect the blackness? If you shine the light, okay, you have a annular space, okay, something like a coin with a hole in the center. Okay. So, suppose this is the coin with a hole in the center, and I am putting a light here, and here is my filter paper which is black in color, and the lower side of the coin I have put photo cell. So, I am shining the light, it is falling on the paper, depending on how white it is or how black it will scatter the same amount of light. That light will fall on photocell on the other side of the photocell or the other side of the coin, and then it will give you some light signal. Higher is this voltage, less black the surface has to be. If it is collected lot of particles, then lesser light will be reflected or scattered, and then voltage signal will also be lesser. Okay. So, that way you can correlate the presence of particles in the exhaust, if it is low or if it is high, but you certainly cannot find out this many grams per kilowatt hour of particles or this many grams per kilometer of vehicle travel, particles are being emitted. So, smoke opacimeters are very simple devices, very cheap devices, in fact garage type of devices, which can tell you the health of the engine and how nice the engine is working. Okay. So, in general smoke and opacimeters are much simpler. Some of them are very simple and less costly in comparison to most other instruments used in the PM measurement. Okay. Just to give you an idea, if you want a full PM measurement as per regulations, the cost of the instrument will be in excess of 15 to 20 crore rupees. Okay. So, it is really expensive. Okay. So, opacimeters on the other hand are very cheap, 3-4 lakh you can get, and you can still manage reasonable measurements. Okay. They are often used to evaluate smoke emissions in locations outside the laboratory, such as in maintenance shops or garages or in the field, and they can give you valuable information about the functioning of the engine. In fact, smoke opacity measurement is the only relatively low cost and widely available method to measure a PM related emission parameter in the field. Okay. You do not measure the particulate matter PM gravimetric measurement in the field. The only thing that you can do in field is opacimeter measurement, smoke opacity measurement. So, for this reason, opacity limits are used for most INM, inspection and maintenance practices, or periodic technical inspection programs of diesel engines such as gensets or cars, etc. You go to a garage and then they check the smoke opacity level and tell you whether your car's health is okay or not, whether the injectors need a replacement or tuning or whatever, just by looking at the smoke opacity. Because if there is a problem with the injector or the fuel pump, obviously it will not be injecting the right quantity, and if it is not injecting the right quantity, it will affect the smoke emissions, and the smoke opacity will reflect that. Smoke opacity limits may also be included as auxiliary limits in new emission standards that are being considered. So, as I said, smoke meters that use light can be broadly classified into two types: a light reflective type that measures the smoke concentration based on the changes in reflectivity when light is shown on the PM collected on the filter paper. So, I showed you this is the first one, like a concentric hole coin kind of a situation where you have the light coming from the top, and on the bottom you have the filter paper on through which you have already passed a known volume of exhaust gas. And the second type is light transmitting type, which is the opacimeter that measures the smoke concentration based on the strength of absorbed and scattered light when the light is shown directly on the exhaust gas. So, this is like tube filled with smoke. Okay. The exhaust gas is drawn into the sample cell when the gas contains black smoke due to high temperature fuel combustion, and blue and white smoke due to unburnt oil, unburnt fuel and water, and visible light from the light source is attenuated due to absorption and scattering. So, if there are any black particles or blue smoke or white smoke, it is going to block the light, okay, and it is going to attenuate the absorption and scattering of the photons. The concentration of the smoke is calculated from the amount of attenuation using Beer-Lambert equation. What is Beer-Lambert equation? I will just show you. This is the Beer-Lambert equation. Okay. Here you see the results are expressed as opacity, which is given as percentage by equation 2. This is the equation 2. A light absorption coefficient K given by equation 3. So, this is the intensity of light. Intensity of light when smoke exists is I, and I naught is the intensity of light when there is no smoke. So, you fill the clean air, no particles are there. So, your photomultiplier tube is going to give maximum voltage. So, that is the maximum intensity, and e to the power minus KL. K is basically a coefficient of absorption, and L is the length of the smoke tube. Okay, and this is represented as I naught 1 minus n by 100, n is given as 1 minus I by I naught into 100, and k therefore is minus 1 by L natural log of 1 minus n by 100. So, these are the three equations which are used. L is the cell length. So, sometimes you want to make compact systems. So, what you do is, when you want to make a compact system, sometimes you act smart, and this smartness is shown in the design of this instrument. So, there is a light source here, and this is the tube. Okay. The air is coming in, this is actually a divided tube. Okay. So, actually this is, in this design there is no divided tube, this is just one chamber. Okay. So, what you are doing is that you put these fans on off in the first place, the exhaust gas comes in from here. So, exhaust gas goes on both sides. So, when the exhaust is put in, this whole thing is filled with smoke. So, you have the light source here, and this is half mirror. So, half mirror basically is such that it will allow the light to pass, and then there is a lens. So, lens will make the all the light parallel to this tube, and then there is a mirror. So, light will pass this side and get reflected, comes back, and then it falls on this half mirror. So, this half mirror then reflects all the light, and this is the detector where it is detected. So, now in this case, what will be the length of the tube from here to here, from here to here, or not? Actually, the length will be from here to here and here to here, because now exhaust is passing, the light is passing twice in the exhaust path. So, actually length will be twice, and that is why I said that you are trying to make instrument smaller and smaller, otherwise you have to have very long tubes. So, by doing this kind of improvisation, you can make the sampling unit very, very small. So, when you have to do the calibration, what you do is you stop the sample gas and you start these blowers. So, then all the smoke is pushed out, and there will be no smoke particles inside, no particulate, and then when the light travels, it falls back. This photo cell will give you very high voltage. When you put smoke, this voltage will actually reduce, because now the light falling on this detector will also be lower. Okay. So, this is how the Beer-Lambert's law is used for the measurement of smoke opacity. Okay. So, this is just one example. This is the same figure which I just explained to you. This is just one example where you have you take your car to the garage, and the exhaust gas sample, they put some probe, and then it brings to some unit like this, and here you can detect the smoke opacimeter, and then it comes to another unit where you can detect the exhaust, carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, NO, HC, not with so great precision, but this is what is called the garage instrument. Okay.